Isaiah chapter 41. Two men raised up, one in the spiritual realm for the invisible things of God to be carried on throughout all eternity, never would end. The righteous man raised up in verse number 2. And then the political man raised up in verse 25 for God to bring into order the kingdoms of this very world. And in the midst of it, he begins to tell Israel, verse 8, "But thou, Israel, art my servant, Jacob whom I have chosen," and he goes one step beyond, "the seed of Abraham, my friend." Jesus said, "I call you no more servants, for the servant knoweth not what his master doeth. But I call you friends, because all the things that the Father hath given me, I have given to you." In verse number 2, and where we were this morning, "called him to his foot, gave the nations before him, and made him rule over kings." Here's something you Bible scholars might want to undertake for next week's Bible study. "He gave them as dust to his sword, and has driven stubble to his bow." Abraham had the power of the political realm too, ruling over kings and so forth. You'll find references to dust and stubble in the New Testament. I don't have time to go through that today, but I enjoyed studying those two words and following them through the Bible. Now, in verse number 4, the question is asked by God and answered, "Who hath wrought and done it?" Calling the generations from the beginning. Now we're talking about Abraham now. "I, the Lord, the first," and he doesn't say the last. What does he say? "With the last," and the "am" is not really there. It's really saying "I am," like Jesus said, or God said to Moses in Exodus 3:14, "I am that I am." "I, the Lord, the first, and with the last, I am he." So he begins to say the issue of himself with Abraham is calling the generations from the beginning. So he determined for this to be, and it was God who did it. Look at chapter 40 and verse 12. "Who hath measured the waters," a question, "who hath measured the waters in the hollow of his hand, and meted out heaven with a span, and comprehended the dust of the earth in a measure, and weighed the mountains in scale, and the hills in a balance?" So he begins to talk about the Spirit of the Lord doing it in verse number 13. Verse 26 of Isaiah 40. "Lift up your eyes on high, and behold who hath created these things, that bringeth out their host by number. He calleth them all by names, by the greatness of his might, for that he is strong in power, not one faileth." Chapter 42 and verse 24. "Who gave Jacob for a spoil, and Israel to the robbers? Did not the Lord, he against whom we have sinned? For they would not walk in his ways, neither were they obedient unto his law." Everything points back to God. Chapter 43 and verse 10. "Ye are my witnesses, saith the Lord, and my servants whom I have chosen, that ye may know and believe me, and understand that I am he. Before me there was no God formed, neither shall there be after me." At some time or other, the human being is going to have a thought pattern, or have a thought process to lead him to think, where'd God come from? And of course, we have Superman to give us an understanding of superhuman man coming into the human race. And he had parents before, and his planet got blown up, and they shot him out away from the planet and the destruction just in time. And his daddy was named Gerald, and his mama was named Ms. Gerald. And that's how we understand in our natural man, where God, we will satisfy ourselves in trying to interpret God. You just have to believe that God is. Without faith, you can't believe that God is, that you will believe that God is and is a rewarder of them that diligently seek him. In verse 6 of chapter 44, thus saith the Lord, the King of Israel, and his Redeemer, the Lord of hosts, I am the first and I am the last, and beside me there is no God. Chapter 48 and verse 12. Are you multiplying scriptures? I sure am. Chapter 48 and verse 12. Hearken unto me, O Jacob, and Israel my called. I am he, I am the first, and I am also the last. You'll run into this again in the book of the Revelation, and we won't take time to go over there and read all of that. But in the midst of all this, if you go back to chapter 41, you'll begin to see when God sets forth his sovereignty in verses 1 through 4. In verses 5 through 7, you begin to have men who don't have the faith, who cannot see, who do not believe. They begin their idolatry. We'll see this again in the book of Romans. Verse 5, the isle saw it and feared. The ends of the earth were afraid, drew near and came. It said, when they knew God, they glorified him not as God. They feared, they knew. They helped everyone his neighbor, so they did begin to band together in a confederacy of men. And everyone said to his brother, don't worry about all that about God and his sovereignty. We're going to work this thing out. So the carpenter encouraged the goldsmith. He that smootheth with a hammer, they would take gold and beat it till it became into long, thin sheets. And the more they beat it, the thinner it became, and then they would cover the idol with it. He that smootheth with a hammer, him that smote the anvil, they get together saying, it is ready for the soldering. Okay, let's fasten it together now. And he fastened it with nails that it should not be moved. So when you have God revealing himself in his sovereign glory and in his sovereignty, there is, as our brother well brought to us this morning, a very balanced message on the double-edged sword. So you have the first 4 verses instructing about God and his relationship to sovereignly raising up an idolater of the Ur of the Chaldees who believed God and came on to God, but the ones that didn't, they got deeper into idolatry. Look at Romans chapter 1. If you will carefully read Romans chapter 1 and not get all hyped up on the issues of modern day religion, which are abortion and homosexuality, if you'll stay with the issue of God, which is God's glory, if you'll just read that chapter 1, you'll find out that homosexuality comes from a rejection of the sovereignty of God. That's all you got about it in the Bible. There it is. It's laid out for you. Romans chapter 1, verse 18. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men. Who did he raise up? A righteous man from the east, Abraham, who hold or suppress the truth down in unrighteousness. You want to destroy the truth, just live unrighteousness. Because that which may be known of God is manifest to them. When they knew God, they glorified him not as God. We'll see that in a minute. And he tells you in the first 4 verses all about God and his sovereignty and how he sovereignly elected, chose, raised up Abraham, his friend, to begin the race of faith. And as he does that and manifests himself, then those who reject it and stand against it, they fall into this business of idolatry one way or another. Because that which may be known of God, listen, is manifest in them. For God hath showed it unto them. There is no human being who is genuinely, actually, truthfully an atheist. He cannot be. God has showed it in their hearts. They may go about to do everything they can to stomp out and destroy the awareness of God in their minds and in their souls, but to no avail. It is inherent in man to know there is a God, because God hath showed it unto them. And to back it up, at the mouth of two witnesses, let every word be established, we have the visible things that reveal the invisible things. Romans 1:20, for the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made. How far does it go? Even to his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Now listen at verse 21. Because that when they knew God, how did that come about? Verse 19, God showed it unto them. They glorified him not as God, neither were thankful. Here is a continuous downward spiral into idolatry. They knew God. Number one, they refused to glorify him as God. Number two, they were not thankful. Number three, that caused their imagination to become vain. And number four, it darkened their foolish heart. And then the result was, professing themselves to be wise, they became fools and changed the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image made like to corruptible man and to birds and four-footed beasts and creeping things. And if you don't believe that, just go back and try to study some, is the proper word Egyptology, where the top part of the guy is a hawk and the bottom part's a man. They try to combine those forces of nature that they admire in with the human stature of the man and say, well, that's our God. Dagon, if I remember correctly, and I think I do, was a fish. And every time they went in to see about how he was doing every morning, after they brought the ark of God in there, he was laying on his face worshiping God, as it were, with his head busted off and all that sort of thing. Anyhow, God showed them that they were wrong about it. So the idolatry comes from the revelation of God to Abraham. How many gods are there? How many heavens are there? How much truth is there? How many Jesus Christs are there? But as the brother brought out this morning, I think it was in Corinthians, where he said that there's one a savor of life, and the other you're an aroma or savor of death. But it's only one gospel, only one God. So in this revelation to Abraham, God don't waste anything. He's like a real strict mama who ain't going to throw away that turkey till y'all eat everything except the bones. You're going to have turkey salad, you're going to have turkey soup, you're going to have turkey sandwiches. You're going to eat that till it's all done with. God don't waste nothing. Excuse my lack of English. God doesn't waste anything. Anyhow, nothing's wasted. So when this revelation comes forth to Abraham, boom, idolatry springs up. Because the devil now has God to raise the issue to a spiritual realm, and he can't stand it. Now, the kind of tater that the devil is an imitator. He can't originate anything. But he always takes that which God does and says, Yea, hath God said. And here we go. So in these verses 5 through 7, we have idolatry coming forth right in the midst of God telling how great God is and how much he is obligated himself to his friend Abraham. But what does verse 8 say? What are the first two words in Isaiah 41 and verse 8? But thou. Isn't that something? What's the next word? Israel. This is contrary to what's going on in the world. That's why Abraham had to get out from among them. Because the surge of revelation that God begins now, you know Proverbs 4:18, don't you? The path of the just shineth more and more, till the perfect day. That God's revelation is like the sun coming up. Gradually, it keeps on increasing. Well, as God began to shine this light and begin to increase knowledge, here comes the devil doing what he's supposed to do and brings forth idolatry. And God begins to say, okay, Israel, I was honest with you. Verses 5 through 7 are just as much as my revelation of this particular chapter as verses 1 through 4. But I want you to know this, in contradiction to the rest of it, but thou, Israel, he says, art my servant, first word, Jacob whom I have chosen, the seed of Abraham, my friend, second word, and that goes directly to John chapter 15, where Jesus said, I call you no more servants, for the servant doesn't know what his master's doing. I call you friends, and one of the things that qualify the definition of a friend is telling them everything that the Father told me. He said, I'll bring you in on everything, and that truth will make you free. So, but thou, and Israel, contrary to what happens in verses 5 through 7, you are going to be from the raised up man, the seed of whom is Christ, Galatians 3:16. And do you know Galatians 5:6? Got a Bible? What's the relationship between faith that Abraham had and the faith that we have and God, who is love? Galatians 5:6. What do it say?
For Jesus Christ, neither circumcision availeth anything, nor uncircumcision, but faith which worketh by love.
Ah, so, Charlie Chan, what did you just find out? The faith of Abraham is derived from the love of God. And the love of God will not leave you as servants. It can't bear you to be diminished. It brings you on up to itself. It seeketh not its own. It's not puffed up. Believeth all things, endureth all things. There's a richness about love. So that love brings you into friendship. And so Galatians 5:6 says, guess how faith works? By love. God is love. He gave us faith, which was once delivered to the saints. And UPS or nobody else can mess it up. You can't undeliver it. FedEx or whatever. It's theirs. Nobody can take it away from them. It will endure to the end until faith blossoms into glory. Now abideth faith, hope, and love. But what's the greatest of these? Love. Why? Because love started out faith when we couldn't be immediately in the presence of God, we have faith to believe. The invisible things of him are clearly seen. How? By the eye of faith. But what will it bring us to? When faith and hope has obtained its object, you don't need to have faith in getting it, about getting it, and you don't need to say, I hope I get it. You got it. So what have you got? Love. Ain't that good? Whew, it's amazing. It is amazing to me. Genesis chapter 12 and verse 3. It is amazing to me to finally slow down, pay attention, and ask God what was his sermon that he preached before unto Abraham. What was your sermon title that made Abraham believe God? Genesis chapter 12 and verse 3. And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee. And here it is. And in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. That was the gospel message. Look at Galatians 3:8. The book of Galatians, chapter 3. And verse number 8. And the scripture, foreseeing that God would justify the heathen through faith, preached before the gospel unto Abraham. What was the gospel message? In thee shall all nations be blessed. That was what he preached to him. Now, wait a minute. Nations are going to be blessed, and I can't even have a son? And he went to God and said, hey, Eliezer is my best and highest servant. Give him seed that I might have my continuance through him. God said, no, it ain't going to be through him. It's going to be out of your own body. 14 years later, he's dead as a hammer and can't do nothing. That was the issue of faith. Not in thee shall you have one son, because he had 5 more by Keturah, but in thee shall all the nations of the earth be blessed. Why? Because in that Isaiah 41, verses 1 through 4, you have God speaking of raising up Abraham, but in verses 5 through 7, you have God raising up idolaters. Then in verse 25, you have God raising up a man from the north, who is Cyrus, to deal with all those idolaters. It all comes from God, and he continues to say, I am the first and I am the last. And he talks about all these nations and God being in control of all those nations on the face of the earth. It is amazing to see that God, in his single revelation to one man, in doing that, it is so powerful that it at that time begins the seed that will branch out and will govern the entire world's history. All those of faith, they're children of Christ. All those that's Christ's children are Abraham's seed. It's unbelievable. And all those who hear and are close to and witness the goodness of God in the blessedness of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph, that have not the faith of Abraham, they populate the world of idolatry and produce the need for hell to enlarge itself and for there to be a broad way for them to enter in therein. But it's all done by God revealing himself to Abraham. That's amazing. Now, Galatians 12, I keep saying that. Genesis 12:3, we just read it. What was the gospel? Galatians 3:8, that God preached to Abraham. In thee shall all the nations of the earth be blessed. Think about this. Ephesians 3. Ephesians 3, verse 1. For this cause I, Paul, the prisoner of Jesus Christ, for you Gentiles, if ye have heard of the dispensation of the grace of God, which is given me to youward, if you've heard about God giving me the responsibility to preach the gospel to the Gentiles, how that by revelation he made known to me, watch it, the mystery. He's saying that knowing the dispensation of the grace of God, that he should be the apostle to the Gentiles, has been a mystery. As I wrote afore in few words, whereby when ye read, ye may understand my knowledge in the mystery of Christ. Now, are you going to believe verse 5 or not? The mystery in other ages was not made known to the sons of men, but God told Abraham in Genesis 12:3. What are you going to make out of Ephesians 3 and verse 5? Which in other ages was not made known unto the sons of men, as it is now revealed unto the holy apostles and prophets by the Spirit. What is that mystery? That the Gentiles should be fellow heirs and of the same body and equal takers of his promise in Christ by the gospel, whereof I was made a minister according to the gift of the grace of God, given unto me by the effectual working of his power. Verse 9, to make all men see what is the fellowship of the mystery, which from the beginning of the world hath been hid in God, who created all things by Jesus Christ, to the intent that now we see it, and now we can preach it, and now the powers and principalities in heavenly places can know it by the church. But wait a minute. That's what God told Abraham. So what the Apostle Paul is saying, generally speaking, and especially to the Jewish nation, this thing about the Gentiles being brought in is a hidden mystery. But that thing was so powerful when God revealed it to Abraham, it's like God said, oops, I wasn't supposed to let that out. That ain't supposed to come out till I change Saul to Paul and send him forth to the Gentiles. No. Abraham was his friend. And what do you do with your friend? You tell him all your secrets. So long before there was a Saul of Tarsus, God told Abraham, in thee shall all the nations of the earth be blessed. And he saw my day. He skipped over everything from Exodus to whatever, to the book of Acts, and jumped right over there where the Apostle Paul was and saw every bit of that. That was what Abraham believed. Isn't that amazing? So the gospel that God preached to his friend was a revelation of a mystery that wasn't even going to get to be a mystery for centuries to come, because he didn't consider it, and he didn't let Abraham consider it to even be a mystery. It's just, I'm calling you as my friend, and I'm telling you everything. Isn't that amazing? So Abraham saw things that was not given to be seen, generally speaking, until the Apostle Paul got here, and it was revealed to him, and even Peter couldn't see it. And God beat Peter over the head 15 times to get him to try to see it. Let that sheet down 3 times to get him not to call common and unclean that which God had cleansed. And he still didn't want to go downstairs and eat with them Gentiles. And when James and the boys came down from Jerusalem, he quit eating his ham sandwich and threw it over in the potted plant, so he's hoping them Jews wouldn't see him over there eating with them Gentiles and eating stuff forbidden to the Jews. And Paul got up from his table and went over there and blessed him out in front of everybody, which, well, he should have. And Abraham was in heaven clapping and saying, "Lay it on him, Paul." That's what God told me thousands of years back. And that's the gospel that God told me, that caused me to come out from among them. Be not partaker of them, and to get out of the Ur of the Chaldees. And when God gets you out of something, he gets that something out of you. God gets you out of Egypt, he'll get Egypt out of you. God got Abraham out of the Ur of the Chaldees, God got the Ur of the Chaldees out of him. And he believed God. And it was accounted to him for righteousness. What's your issue? Revelation 11. Why do you do that? Hebrews 11:8. The issue with Abraham was going out to a place he never had been before. Hebrews 11:8. Went out when he was called to go out to a place which he should after receive for an inheritance. Obeyed. And he went out not knowing whither he went. And he went out and dwelt among all them Gentiles over there in that land that would soon be conquered by Joshua and all the armies of Israel, for the nation of Israel to begin to live there. That was his issue. Then verse 17, by faith Abraham, when he was tried, offered up Isaac. For he that had received the promises offered up his only begotten son, accounting that God was able to raise him up even from the dead, from whence also he received him in a figure. So we see Abraham's issue truly causes us to understand that he is the father of the faithful. For he had all of this given to him, when as yet there are no Bibles, when as yet there is no Moses to write. He just had God alone. And he believed everything God told him, did everything God told him to do. And God took him out one day and he said, "Come here, I want you to see something." He said, "What is it?" He said, "Look up." He said, "You count them blinking things up there? Those stars blinking and twinkling and all that stuff?" He said, "I don't guess anybody can." He said, "That's how your seed's going to be." Then he took him to the seashore and he said, "You see them little bitty grains of sand that holds back that mighty ocean? It's amazing to me how God can hold back a whole ocean with just grains of sand. That's just like God." He said, "You know how many grains of sand there are?" He said, "I don't guess anybody can know that." He said, "That's how your seed will be." And it all came by God saying, "In thee shall all the nations of the earth be blessed." And Abraham had an effect on everybody he came in contact with down throughout his life. In John 15, John chapter 15, verse 12, this is my commandment, that ye love one another as I have loved you. Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. Now, upon reading that in the natural mind, you think about martyrdom. It ain't talking about standing in front of a wall and getting shot by a firing squad. It's talking about get out of thy father's house, leave thy kindred, and come to a place that I will show thee. Leave everything behind. Lay down your life. Abraham, did you have any plans or purposes or hopes in your life? Well, yeah, me and Sarah, we got married, and we want to have kids, and, Lot, he's our nephew, and we may, kind of help him get money to go to college, go to, donkey and camel college and learn about stuff, and forget it. Lay down that life, walk out on the earth or called is. Where we're going, I don't know. All I know is I'm staying with God's foot. And he's going to turn it into what one of the brothers reminded me of at lunch today. Every place where thy foot shall touch, it will be yours. That's what he told Joshua. Every place the sole of thy foot touches, it's going to be yours. So Abraham had to believe that God's foot, him staying close to that and walking with God, would turn out to be God blessing and committing to Israel that which would come from their feet. But you know what Amos 3:3 says? Can two walk together except they be agreed? So if you're going to walk with another person, you got to walk at the same speed. Generally, you'll take up the same gait, but I guarantee you'll have to walk in the same direction. So as Abraham came to the foot of God, I called him to my foot. That's how he knew where he was going. Well, wherever God leads, I'll go. I can't put an X on the map and say, this is where we're going to wind up next week, but I can put an X on the map and say, that's God's foot and I'm going to walk with him. That's how it works. And then God's foot transferred over to Joshua's foot, and Amos 3:3 says, if you can walk with God, you'll have to be agreed with him. And Abraham got to a place where he didn't want anything but what God wanted, and he wanted everything that God did want. Ye are my friends if you do whatsoever I command you. Henceforth I call you not servants. For the servant, here it is, the servant knoweth not what his Lord doeth. That's religion. We pay our dues and attend the meetings. We're just religionists. We don't know about God's mind and will. We can't understand the Bible. But I have called you friends, for all things that I have heard of my Father I have made known unto you. The Spirit searcheth the deep things, yea, the things of the Spirit of God. Those things no man knoweth of himself. There's a spirit in man that only knows the things of man. But the Spirit of God searcheth all the deep things of God and reveals them unto us. Deuteronomy 29:29 says, the secret things belong unto the Lord. There's some things we ain't never going to know. But the things that are revealed belong unto us and to our children. And Abraham, I'm going to open it up and start showing you all that is to be known, and it's even going to be a hit over there to the Ephesians church, as Paul begins to write his letter. And the first chapter is going to say, I'm going to tell y'all a great mystery. He said, Abraham, I'm going to tell you now. All the nations, not just Jews, but all the nations shall be blessed in you. And it'll be in the same pattern of what God was doing there in Isaiah 41. He lays down his life. Abraham walked out on everything he had and walked out with God. Let's finish up. Isaiah 51. Now, I read up as much as I could on the of the Chaldees. And one said 100,000 people, others said up to 300,000 people lived in that capital city at one time. Finding Abraham, to me, not to God, would be like looking for a needle in a haystack. But God didn't have any trouble finding his friend. He knew right where he was. In Isaiah 51, hearken unto me, ye that follow after righteousness. So he's going to follow after righteousness, and this is the one who's raised up. He raised up a man from the east, a righteous man. Ye that seek the Lord. Here's what you need to do. If you're going to follow after righteousness and seek the Lord, you need to look unto the rock whence ye are hewn, and to the hole of the pit which ye are digged. What are you talking about? It's talking about we were not only dead in trespasses and sins, and as it were, buried 6 feet under like a dead man, but we didn't have any righteousness at all. And we have to find the one, to find the pattern of God, to know how to seek the Lord. Who did he say in the very next verse you would have to look for in looking to the rock whence you are hewn and looking to the hole of the pit whence you were digged? Look unto Abraham your father and to Sarah that bare you, for, listen, I called 2 words. 300,000 people in that capital city of which was called, quote, the capital of the world, unquote. And God sought him out and found him. I called him alone and understood. I blessed him alone and understood. I increased him alone. Why did you do that? For the Lord will comfort Zion, not Israel, but Zion, the spiritual church. He will comfort all her waste places. I don't care if you are in the of the Chaldees, if it is a waste place as far as people are concerned or spiritual things are concerned, I'm going to comfort you there. I will make her wilderness like Eden and her desert like the garden of the Lord. Joy and gladness shall be found therein, thanksgiving and the voice of melody. Singing and making melody where? In your heart. Abraham didn't have a church. His pastor was God. God's one preached to him. God preached a message that just blew the minds of anybody else that might have heard it. In these shall all the nations of the earth be blessed. Fast forward, fast forward, fast forward, fast forward, fast forward, go all the way down. Stop there, Saul of Tarsus. All right, now let's see what he's going to do. This mystery that I had that was hidden before me, and nobody in the world knew about it. It's a mystery that's been hidden from the very beginning that's just now being made known to me. Wait a minute. Hey, Saul. What is it, Abram? I know it. That's the gospel God preached to me. He showed me the whole span of the world and kept saying, I'm the beginning and I'm the end. And I saw it all. So when his son comes on the earth, he's going to say, Abraham saw my day. Ain't that good? So, look to the pit which you digged. Look to the rock from which they chinked us out of. And then it don't say look unto the rock and look unto the hole. In verse 2 it said look unto Abraham. So he must be the rock in the pit. He says, why don't we look for him? For I, God, called him alone. Did you know you can't get in your grandchildren into heaven? Did you know that you can't get your children into heaven? Did you know you can't get your husband or your wife in? One more. Did you know you can't get you in? So what do? Look unto Jesus, the author and finisher. How about them apples? He started it and he'll end it. And Philippians 1:6 said he's everything in the middle. He that hath begun a good work in you will finish it unto the day of Jesus Christ.